Thank you. And Amy, thanks so much for joining us. We've been talking here all morning about protecting our data, about our privacy. And in your fascinating and, dare I say, really frightening book, The Big Nine, you make the case that the situation is a lot more dire. You say that humanity is facing an existential crisis because no one has addressed the fundamental question around AI, which is really the future, the next era of computing. Tell us, what is that question, and who are the big nine companies who created the problem but are yet central to solving it?
Sure. So, it's important to bear in mind that when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's a tremendous amount of misplaced optimism and fear. There's also a lot of misunderstanding. Artificial intelligence isn't a singular technology. There is no switch. There is no singularity. We are on a 7 to 8 decade trajectory. And the reason that it matters is because everything else plugs into, in some way, systems that make autonomous or automatic decisions on our behalf using our data. And for those paying attention, that sentence is the definition of AI.
Right.
So
okay.
That's it.
But what is it that we haven't addressed?
So here's what we haven't addressed. We have not, in our country, done any long-term thinking, strategy, or planning. And therefore, we don't have a clear understanding of what the downstream implications are of autonomous transportation systems that make decisions on our behalf, of the relationship between biotechnology and AI, or, quite simply, the relationship that everyday people have with systems that are primarily built in the commercial sector that make decisions for us. So that leads into the second part of your question, which is, who are they?
Right. The G-Mafia and the...
That's right. So in my research as a quantitative futurist, over the years, I keep coming back to the same 9 companies. It is these 9 companies who have the overwhelming number of lion's share of patents. They are well capitalized. They are able to attract the best talent. It's their custom silicone. It's their frameworks. It's their data sets. These are the companies that are effectively building and have been building the future of AI, and as a result have an outsized influence on the future of humanity. 3 are in China. That's Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And in the United States, there are 6, which I call the G-Mafia.
All right, love them.
So that's Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, IBM, and Apple. It does not mean that Huawei is not doing interesting things or that NVIDIA isn't doing tremendous work in computer vision, but at some point, all roads lead back to these 9 companies. And they serve different purposes depending on where they're based.
Right, and you make the case that this issue, the problem stems from the fact that in the United States, the G-Mafia is too beholden to shareholders, to the market. And then in China, the BAT is too beholden to the Chinese government. So how do we fix that?
Right, so again, I think one of our great strengths in America is that we have a free market economy and creativity, and that has propelled various parts of industry across the entire country. The challenge when it comes to AI is that we have no strategic direction, we have no point of view, we have no policy, we have a collection of bullet points and a scattered assortment of people working across the federal government who are trying to figure out what all of it means, while everybody in the Valley, in the other capital of the United States, the Valley and Seattle and Redmond, are forging ahead on their own. And the problem here is that in that situation, speed is prioritized over safety. So there is no financial incentive to do risk modeling. There is no financial incentive to shore up the bias that you've heard about all morning. That would be a loss. I don't even think that would be categorized as a loss leader. So we have, and to that point, I think we oftentimes think of the usual suspects, women and people of color,
right,
who are discriminated against. What we don't recognize is that we're all being discriminated against in some way. If you drive a car, the beep beeps that back up, like when you back up, that help you recognize objects so you don't hit something. In my car, they also turn down the volume of the radio. Now that may seem insignificant, it's annoying, right? That may seem insignificant, but if we, again, fast forward 10 years, think of the constellation of things that you will no longer have control over. That's the United States. It's different in China. In China, the bat may be publicly traded companies with smart, independent CEOs, but by virtue of the fact that they are Chinese companies, they are working in lockstep with Beijing.
Talk to us about something they're doing over there, testing out now the social credit score system. I found that so disturbing, so scary, and it's happening.
Sure, so this is something we're starting to hear more and more about. It's good to keep in mind that in Chinese, so I lived in China and Japan. In Chinese culture, is a long-term tradition of tattletaling on other people as a way to create social harmony. Now, you could argue that the social credit score system is an algorithmic version of that. So when you perform meritorious work, you are awarded points. When you go against the grain of society,
jaywalk, yeah.
That's right, points are deducted. This is not a program that's been rolled out nationwide yet, but it is definitely being rolled out. And according to the Chinese government's own statistics, last year, 17.5 million people were not allowed to buy plane tickets. I'm sorry, 7.5 million people weren't allowed to fly.
Because their social credit score was too low?
Because their score was too low. 300,000 people did a great job at work. They had good performance reviews, but their social credit scores were too low, and they were denied promotions. So again, as Americans, you may say,
why should I care?
Why should I care? That's interesting. The reason is because, again, we've been asleep at the wheel. And so what everybody has somehow failed to recognize is that all of this is part of China's BRI. So this is the Belt and Road Initiative, which appears as though it is an economic incentive linking countries and locales along the old Silk Road route, where China has been building bridges and roads, right? For debt.
Doing good, helping struggling countries with their infrastructure.
For significant
so
debt
altruistic
that they will never pay
yes,
back, right?
Of course.
But they're also deploying 5G, and they are laying fiber, and this is where Huawei comes back into view. So they're, again, like, I find it fascinating that somehow we allowed Huawei to go into all of these companies and help build out their infrastructure, and they did it at a significant loss, but this is a place where we might have come in, or we plus a coalition of the willing with our traditional allies came in and tried to bump up the digital infrastructure of emerging markets. We just didn't. For too long, our government and certainly people in the United States continue to believe that China's a copy-paste culture. And somehow that is still the prevailing viewpoint. And they're stealing plenty of IP. They're also innovating. They're not building entirely new cool widgets. They're innovating in diplomacy in ways that are have escaped people, I think, working in DC.
Well, let's talk about people working in DC, because you say a lot of the solution is here, though not regulation. So if you want to weigh in a little on what Zuckerberg said, that's great. But you have said we're so short-sighted. We have this nowist mentality where we don't even have a national AI policy. We're cutting back on our federal funding of science and technology research. How can we even begin to compete with the Chinese, who have their plan for dominance in AI by 2030, and they're well on the way to getting there?
Yet we can't. So this is the hard truth that it would behoove all of us to just recognize and start dealing with. And that is that China and Russia both have, as part of their governance structures, a system in which they have a very top-down approach. So somebody decides something, they're going to get to space, and then there's Sputnik, and then China has a defense program, and then they kind of fizzle out. Or Japan decided it was going to shore up its economy, they were going to be world dominant in cars, and then you sort of see their economy putter out. The problem is that people who matter are looking at these past examples as some kind of prediction about the future of AI, and what they fail to recognize is that artificial intelligence is not a thing like a car. It is many different things. And so we are at a strategic disadvantage because for too long we have failed to recognize China as a real militaristic, economic, and diplomatic pacing threat. So what do we do about that?
Right.
We can't regulate our way out of this problem. We can't continue to point the finger. The big tech companies have done plenty bad, but they're also our best hope for the future. So antagonizing them is not going to solve the problem.
So Washington and Silicon Valley have to start working together?
And it's not just the Valley. So the United States has a nexus of 3 powers. One is in New York, that's the financial sector. One is here in Washington, D.C., that's policymakers and government. And the other one is the Valley. And they have a codependent relationship that rely on each other. And the best possible outcome is not the punitive measures of democracy that is all we keep going back to over and over again. The best possible way forward is a creative set of economic incentives where these publicly traded private companies, where these companies still are heroes to their shareholders, to whom they have a fiduciary responsibility. The investors are incentivized to give these guys some breathing room and not rush everything to commercial market, because at this point, all of us are constantly being mined, refined, productized, optimized, and monetized. So you can't just pull the plug on that. And in DC, yes, we probably need some guardrails. We need some ability to have long-term planning, and we need to have some group that is cohesive, that works across the different agencies, that is not subject to the revolving door of politics, and is also not one of the big consulting firms. If I hear one more person inside of our government who thinks we should outsource our future to a big consulting firm, you know, I mean, how short-sighted could you possibly be? We have to develop institutional capacity. I don't think anybody has any concept of what real situation we're in. And
that's what this book is to do,
that's
right?
right.
And you, we were discussing backstage, you know, is this the results of nightmares that she's had over many years? And now you've put them down on paper to scare the rest of us. But you, inside your 3 possible scenarios for how things will work out, there's the optimistic, the pragmatic, and the catastrophic. Just trust me, if you read this, you don't want either of the latter two. So what, as tech consumers, what can we do right now to incentivize this optimistic scenario? I mean, I have kids. I want them to live in that scenario and not the second or third.
Right, so I've been hearing from a lot of people who have read the book that the catastrophic scenario makes them very, physically ill.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. I'm not a fiction writer. So this is the
This all has a basis in reality.
Correct. This is all data-driven foresight work. So it's not like I made this stuff up. The best possible thing that all of us could do today is to learn what artificial intelligence is, what it isn't, and be able to explain it to another person. If everybody was, and that's something, well, first of all, I told you in like a sentence, it went fast, but anybody can do this. If that alone was the outcome, then we have a baseline from which we can make smarter decisions. And then the next piece of that is understanding what signals matter and which ones don't. Everybody's waiting for some walking, talking robot as evidence of artificial general intelligence, which is the next big thing, right? Where machines supposedly think at a level that we do in a more comprehensive way. A couple weeks ago, we already saw evidence of it, and it wasn't exciting. It was a computer program that learned on its own how to play 3 games at once: checkers, shogi, which is a Japanese game, and Go. That was huge. Nobody cared. Nobody saw why that mattered.
So once we understand what it is and we can tell other people about it, I mean, do we start calling our congressman? How do we influence Silicon Valley?
So the first thing to do is stop. We got to figure out a way to engender collaboration. I'm politically independent. I also recognize that this is going to be a difficult one, given our current political situation in the United States. But we don't have time to wait on this. So individuals, can forge those relationships. That would be wonderful. Go to places where you're going to meet people. Don't show up in your Washington, D.C. finest. If you're at a venue like South by Southwest, blend in with the crowd, but make some of those relationships. Don't offshore it to one of the big consulting companies. The next time that somebody shows you a cool app where you can upload your face and see what fine art painting you look like, stop and be skeptical. It's great that you can learn, which Manet you look like, but why would Does Google really want you to know that much about fine art, or is there something else happening? And I'm totally fine.
Skeptical.
Right, I'm totally fine. So is there a way for us to incentivize, because we do have to train systems, you know, and we are the testing ground. So is there a way to incentivize Google just put in a way that a third grader can understand, hey, by the way, we're going to do something cool for you, you're going to help us out.
Can we end on an optimistic note? Are you optimistic?
Yeah. Here's what the good news is. I could be wrong about all this. I don't think I am.
I kind of hope you are, but
I could be because the scenarios that are in the book span 50 years. Okay, and they most of the stuff happens soon, and then so the good news is that nothing, you know, 50 years from now hasn't happened yet. I haven't traveled back on a time machine, which means we still have the ability to make smarter decisions in the present, and the optimistic framing can happen. But the only way that it happens is if we take meaningful action today. Simply telling people that you have interagency cooperation or that you've got a couple of talking sections isn't enough. If you lose sight of the catastrophic scenario, then I can guarantee you catastrophe is around the corner. But it hasn't happened yet.
Okay, good, the optimistic note. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. That was fascinating.